So pull everything taut.
Okay.
And then try to hold it all together while you go through again. And also try to come out in the same spot on the other side. It's just like the hardest part, I swear.
I know. Just a simple ask.
Hi there, I'm Nikki. This is Pin Cut Sew, and today I want to talk to you about teaching your friends how to sew. If you've been around for a while, you may know that I actually used to teach sewing to kids. I used to teach kids sewing camps and classes, and I did teach some adults classes in there too, but I've also taught several friends how to sew individually, one-on-one, just for fun. And so I have some tips. Recently, my friend Jennifer wanted to make my new giraffe doll pattern. Isn't it cute? And her son loves giraffes, so she said, this is perfect, I'm gonna try it. And she had come over and I had taught her a little bit of the basics already, so this was her more like her second project, even though she did a little sewing on her own in between. And as I was teaching her and as we were getting together and she was sewing, I wrote down some of the strategies that I feel like are really helpful when you're teaching somebody else to sew. I also recently taught my husband how to sew. He's very into kite making and he wanted to try making one. And so he actually finished it this weekend and he went and flew it for the first time. So that's really satisfying and fun. He was a really quick study, actually. He was doing like French seams and everything. So anyway, let's get right into it. But first, you can actually find this pattern along with all the other ragdoll patterns in my shop. I'm gonna put a little link, but this new generation of animal ragdoll patterns is like giving me so much life. Here's the frog, the giraffe, and then by the end of this week, the owl pattern should be out. So if you have a suggestion for the next animal, this was a reader or a viewer suggestion. So somebody asked for the owl and I came through. So if you have a favorite animal you want me to make a pattern for, put it in the comments, let me know. But I'll put the link to all of the doll pattern section of my shop in the first part of the description below. Okay, tip number 1 applies for adults and kids and anybody learning anything new. Let them pick a project that is exciting to them. So instead of saying, well, this is the first thing that I like to teach with, you're going to make a pillow and then you'll have the basics down and then we'll move on. No, let them pick something that excites them. Nobody, I don't think, would look at this draft and think, oh, that's beginner friendly, but I mean, it is. I really try to make all my patterns beginner friendly, but I think a lot of people would be like, oh, that's way too complicated. But no, let them learn each skill, and every project they make that's exciting to them will teach them new skills. And so I think it's really, really important that you let the student pick not just the pattern, but also the fabrics that they really love. Make it like a fun project that they're excited about the outcome of and not just the process, because it's hard to learn something new. We have this amazing guitar teacher that started my son playing the electric guitar, and it's hard to find teachers of anything really that know how to teach teenagers without taking them all the way back to like Mary Had a Little Lamb, you know? And instead he walked in and said, oh, you want to play Metallica? Let's do it. And so he learned so much better because he was so invested in learning to play those songs that he really loves. So the same way here, let the student pick something that's exciting to them. So when I started to teach my friend Jennifer, I said, here's the you've seen my pattern library, pick something you want to make. She picked the pot holders and we made them and she loves them. She uses them. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to teach them on their own sewing machine if at all possible. Sometimes people won't have one, but usually people do have access to a sewing machine. And I've noticed a lot of the time people will say, well, the machine I have is super old, should I get a new one? No, those old machines are amazing. Most of the time, that old machine will outlast any cheapo new one that they can buy. So what Jennifer did was come over with her mother-in-law's old machine. It was, I think it's a Kenmore from, I don't know, 80s, 90s, probably 80s. And it had some issues. It needed oiling and cleaned, and we got the back stitch button was sticking, so we kind of took it apart, saw what was happening, oiled it up and got all that working, and then I taught her how to thread it and use her own machine. Because if she were to come over and use my machine, this is pretty different than the one that she has. So you want them to be able to go home and sew on their own, because that is the whole goal of teaching somebody in your presence, is that so they can also sew outside of your presence, right? Okay, and so tip number 3 is a little bit different than when I teach kids. When I teach kids, I didn't always teach them the inner workings of the sewing machine right away. I found that they learned to thread it and things like that and wind a bobbin as they needed to. But with kids, you just want to get them sewing. And so I would thread it for them. They would learn to thread it over time. But with adults, especially when they're using their own machine that you want them to be able to go home and sew using, you want to teach them how to thread their machine, how to wind a bobbin, teach them that not just any bobbins will do, and that old thread on the wooden spools is not going to work. You need new thread, the right bobbins, a new needle, and get them working on their own machine. Teach them how to thread it so that they know when their thread comes undone, how to redo it, how to wind a new bobbin, etc. And then after that, you don't want to overwhelm a new person with info for anything that they're learning. You don't want to teach them everything at one time. So after they have that basic, here's how your machine works, then just start in on a project and just teach them things as they come up. So while we were making this giraffe doll, I got to teach her a trick for chain piecing when it came to the legs, using the hemostats for stuffing, those little tips and tricks that help with the specific project that she was making. So you can just teach as you go along, and most of my patterns have those little tips in them for new people. So every pattern that a new person makes is going to have new skills, and so you don't have to bombard them with information all at once. This is also true when teaching kids, probably more true when teaching kids because they won't remember. Speaking of teaching kids, let me interrupt and tell you that I have actually written an ebook about this topic. I have made an income sewing now for many years, but the fastest way, maybe the most fun way, besides what I'm doing now, because I love what I do now, was teaching kids sewing camps. And I've shared my experience about this on a video that I made about the different ways to make money sewing. This is my favorite way, and if you need money quick and you want to put your sewing skills to use to make an income for your family in a faster way than like the craft fair circuit, then teaching is such a great way to do that. I had the best experience. I wrote everything, all of my tips, financial tips, the how-tos, the advertising, all of that stuff in an ebook, and I'll put that the link to that in the description below. And so that if you're interested in doing that, you can get started with that information. Okay, my next tip is a hard one for teachers sometimes, and that is not to take anything over and just do it for them. If you have a tricky step, it can be tempting to say, why don't I just do this step for you? Or we're running out of time, so let me just finish this up real quick. But the person really needs to have like ownership of the project, I think, and by doing it for them, I think it triggers something in their mind that thinks, oh, this was too hard for me. I'm a beginner, so I can't tackle just anything. It's not gonna look perfect, but we'll get to that in a minute. But they should have the pride of having done that all the way through. And little tips like when you sew the bottom of the animal doll closed, the presser foot can get in the way. So I taught her how to move the presser foot over, go slowly. Move the needle over so there's less presser foot in the way, to go slowly, and she did it. And that's probably the trickiest part. And then again, attaching the arms. Taught her how to do it herself. So let the person experience and do it themselves, even if they're gonna make a mistake and have to unsew, because unsewing, my light died, is part of sewing. Unsewing is equally important. These lights drive me crazy. Okay, my next tip is to let them sew with the basic tools that they already have on hand. So sometimes if a friend comes over to your place and you have a lot of fancy tools for them to use, like for example, I have this fancy turning tool called the Fast Turn, and it makes turning tubes right side out super easy. But if I let somebody use that over here at my house and then they go home, they still don't know how to turn a tube with a safety pin. So it may seem mean that I don't let them use it, but I want them to learn to use the basic tools that they have. So sewing actually doesn't require a ton of tools, and a beginner is not going to have a lot of things. They're going to have the basic things. So teach them to do it, maybe the slow way, but the way that they can do it at home, because the whole goal of this, again, is so that they can sew by themselves at home. Okay, and then let's take a minute to just talk about the perfectionism aspect. People are so different. It's so funny. Some people will really get fixated on the fact that their end product is not perfect. My friend Jennifer was not that way. Her giraffe turned out so cute, and she did not fixate on the little imperfections because she kept saying, it's my first time, it's fine. And I so appreciated that about her. And so, especially with like quilting, I think adults learning how to sew, unlike children who think everything's amazing that they make, adults just think that everything they make should be perfect, and they really get down on themselves if it's not. So I try to remind them, if you picked up a tuba today and had your first lesson, would you expect to be able to play this song perfectly tomorrow? No. So sewing is one of those things that takes practice. So many things in life take practice to get good at. And no matter what age you start things, you can become an expert at something in a matter of just years of practice. So I think there's this huge myth that you have to start things when you're really young in order to be really good at them. And that might be true of certain things like sports that shape your body in a certain way, but that is not true of things of the mind. My dad started drumming at age 65. He was in his 60s. Started drumming, and now he still takes lessons. He drums at church. He's great. And I find that so inspiring. Also, what do you think that's doing for his cognitive ability as he ages and his hand-eye coordination? Probably so much. So, side rant about learning new things at any age. Anything can be done. I told you recently that I started taking art classes at a studio here in Louisville, and I have learned so much. And I have been able to draw and make art that I did not know was inside of me. I thought artists were born, and I think maybe there is some natural talent, but just like anything like this, I was not born with a natural proclivity to sew. I've just been practicing since I was 8 years old, and it's an all-out passion. I love it. And so when you like something and you enjoy the whole process of it, you can easily spend time practicing and getting better, even through those hard bits. So try to help your friends who you're teaching to sew put their perfectionism aside. Praise every little thing that they're making and doing, and don't let them fixate on their mistakes. Sometimes, and a tip for mistakes, sometimes if something's not perfect, they say, ugh, should I fix that? And usually I give them that option. Sometimes I say, well, it's not going to show, so it's really up to you. Or is it going to bother you? Because if it's going to bother you, you could take it out and do it. Sometimes they'll say, well, what would you do? And I would either say, I'd probably leave it because it's on the inside or whatever. Or I would probably fix it. Let's do it this way this time. And so sort of give them the option if they want to make it better, or if they don't, and if they're fine living with that, totally fine. If something is a flaw that's going to affect the rest of the project and fit, then obviously it needs fixed. But a lot of the times they can opt whether or not they want to take the time to fix that. Okay, number 7. Actually, I have it written as 7, but I think I added a few. So number whatever tip is to just let the process be slow. You don't have to speed run these projects. Jennifer and I have been working on this draft doll now for 2 different sessions, and we still have to make the overalls. So that will be 3 2-hour sessions. It's not worth just rushing the project so they can get on to the next one. I don't know, I have no reason to be out of breath. And just know that when you go to teach a person to sew that, well, you may be able to make pot holders in 20 minutes. It's going to take your friend who's brand new a couple of hours. So be patient, let it be slow. You could even bring a hand sewing project with you, because a lot of the time you're just like, I have downtime and we just chat while she sews. I give her the next instructions and she sews. And it's such fun social time too. And also, now that I've taught her, I can bring my little featherweight over her house sometime maybe, and we can sew together on our own projects. This is the added perks, teaching your friends how to sew. Okay, and ultimately, because the goal is to inspire them to sew on their own, it's important to make them feel like they can do that. So you're giving them the tools to keep learning. And sometimes people will say, oh, I'm just gonna wait for you to make that with me. And sometimes people will just take off and sew everything they want. And both are great. Some need a little bit longer of hand holding, and that's great. But what happened recently was that Jennifer, after our first sewing session with the draft, she texted me and said, I'm gonna hem some shirts that I have. That's pretty simple, right? I just turn it under and sew it. And I said, are they stretchy or woven? And she said, they're stretchy. And so obviously hemming knit tops isn't as straightforward as somebody brand new to sewing would think. But instead of telling her, that's actually pretty complicated, not for beginners, or why don't we do that together next time that we meet up? I told her what kind of needle she needs, what kind of stitch to try. You can totally do it. Of course you can do it. And how to keep the fabric from stretching out as you sew it, things like that. I just gave her a few quick tips with a text conversation. And now she feels equipped to try it on her own. I even said, just cut the length off that you want off and then practice on the scraps so that you can go with confidence. So if your friend is wanting to try something, encourage them to do it. Give them tips, tell them how to do it. Don't just say, oh, that's too complicated maybe for a beginner or whatever. Teaching adults, adults are smart. They can figure it out. A lot of things make a lot of sense to people. Sometimes things I think are abstract with sewing, Jennifer would be like, oh yeah, that's because blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Didn't even have to explain that to her. So teach each person as an individual. And next time your friend says, I wish I could do that, tell them, I can teach you, because it's so much fun to have more sewing friends, right? I hope this has been really helpful for you. If you have taught your friends how to sew, then chime in with your best tips in the comments below. And yeah, we'll talk soon. I'll see you later. Bye.